Hey y'all, welcome back to our weekly Q&A. I'm Katie, and every week I spend a little bit of time answering the questions that you've submitted via YouTube and our website in order to help you get a better understanding of different admissions topics. Don't forget that if you'd like to submit a question for us to answer, leave that question in the comments below this video. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you're one of the first to see our latest helpful tips. Let's get started with today's 4 questions. First off today, Melissa asks us, can you submit different common application essays to different schools? So for example, say you submit an essay to early decision and early action schools and you get rejected. Can you work on that essay and send a revised one through the Common App when you apply later to regular decision schools? Thanks for asking this question, Melissa. I think it's something that many other applicants are wondering, particularly as we're getting later into the fall and more towards regular decision. The answer is yes. You can modify your Common App essay an unlimited number of times. The scenario you mentioned is one of the most common reasons why students would want to revise their essay. If you get rejected after applying early, it's a good idea to review all of the aspects of your early application, including that Common App essay, and try to improve it before you apply in regular decision. For our second question of the day, Tom asks us, how do I break down and understand my SAT score? Your score report will give you a total score, 2 section scores from 200 to 800, one in evidence-based reading and writing and one in math, and 3 test scores that range from 10 to 40, one in reading, one in writing and language, and one in math. You'll be given sub-scores from 1 to 15 and cross-test scores from 10 to 40 that give feedback on your performance in certain skill areas and domains, such as heart of algebra, command of evidence, and analysis in history or social studies. These sub-scores and cross-test scores are important to understand the concepts that you need to improve on if you take the test again. If you notice that one score is lower than your others, particularly if it's significantly lower, you know that you should work on that skill extra to bring it up. You can do that by focusing specifically on questions that test the skill area that you need to improve. The College Board also gives college and career readiness benchmarks, which predict a 75% likelihood of achieving a C or higher in related first semester credit-bearing college courses. That's a 480 for evidence-based reading and writing, and 530 for math. If you hit these benchmarks, then there's a good chance that you're ready for college coursework, though this will of course largely depend on the rigor of the college you're applying to. You'll also be given percentile rankings, both the nationally representative sample percentile and the SAT user percentile. The former indicates where you stand compared to all 11th and 12th grade US students, including those who didn't even take the SAT. The latter shows where you stand among college-bound 11th and 12th graders who have taken the SAT. The SAT user percentile is much more helpful for figuring out where you stand among other college applicants, which is probably the metric you care the most about at this point. Understanding that statistic is simple. If you scored in the 50th percentile, then it means you perform better than 50% of all other college-bound test takers. If you scored in the 98th percentile, then you did better than 98% of other test takers, which is a great score. Of course, one of the most commonly asked questions about the SAT is just whether this score is good. The answer really depends on the colleges on your list. Schools will usually release a middle 50% range of scores, meaning that 25% of accepted students scored below the bottom number of that range, and 25% of admitted students scored above the top number in that range. For example, Princeton's 50% range is 1460 to 1570 on the SAT, meaning that 25% of accepted students scored below 1460 and 25% scored above 1570. If your score is competitive, it should be in the upper end of the range or ideally surpass the upper bound of that range. Hopefully that answers your question. Moving on to our third question asked by Hunter. I'm considering applying to college abroad. So what should I do to prepare for that? Well, that's awesome, Hunter. Applying to college abroad is a really exciting opportunity, and it's something that we don't talk about all that much, so it's a great opportunity to share some advice. If you're an underclassman, one of the first things you should look into is the IB program, which is the International Baccalaureate. The IB program is an international nonprofit education program with the mission of educating students in a globalized world. In particular, the IB diploma program typically runs from junior year through senior year. In addition to typical coursework, the diploma program has 3 more major requirements. First, students must write a lengthy essay that's based on their own independent research. Second, students must take a theory of knowledge course, which covers critical thinking and epistemology. And third, students must participate in a certain number and range of extracurricular activities. The IB program is recognized worldwide, so it will be easier for admissions offices around the world to understand the rigor and the content of your transcript. If you're already an upperclassman though, you don't need to panic if you can't get into IB quickly enough. It's just our advice for any younger viewers out there who may be looking far ahead and considering college abroad. As for actually applying to college abroad, You should first know that the process will likely be more merit and numbers based than the holistic system that we typically use in the US. You'll probably still be asked to write a personal statement, but there probably won't be an activities list, and there might not be any recommendation letters. Your admissions decisions will likely be based primarily on your grades and on your test scores. That obviously depends on the country and on the school, so of course you want to be sure to do your research. Don't expect their application process to look just like ours, and take that time to find out their specifics. As you're thinking about going to college abroad, there are 3 other things that you'll want to consider: the language, differences in educational systems, and maybe most boringly, visa requirements. Let's talk first about the language aspect. You need to be really honest with yourself about whether you speak the local language well enough to actually take classes in it and go about your daily life. You also may need to take a foreign language assessment just to get into school. So for instance, international applicants to US schools usually have to take the TOEFL to assess their English skills. If you decide that you're more comfortable attending a college where English is the full language of instruction, you still have some options abroad. There are a variety of English-speaking countries that are home to really great universities. Even countries where English isn't actually the official language, like Denmark, for instance, some courses there may be taught in English, so you still might have an option. Some countries are even home to American-based universities that operate entirely abroad, for instance, NYU Shanghai. Second, you need to take into account differences in educational systems. So most United States residents are accustomed to a K-12 system where most students don't choose a focus area or a major until college. That system is not the norm everywhere in the world. Not every country has 12 grades. Some countries require students to choose a track or a focus earlier in the process, and many put more emphasis on major exams, kind of similar to AP tests, than schools in the US typically do. As an applicant from a different educational system, you may not have completed that country's typical college requirements and expectations. There are several different ways to deal with that mismatch that you may be facing. Some schools in other countries will accept your United States credentials or other specific credentials that you still can access in the US, like that IB diploma. You might be asked to take additional standardized tests that aren't usually given in the US, or you might be accepted on the condition that you take certain courses to catch up with your other classmates. The bottom line is that if you're considering applying to a college outside the US, you just need to not assume that the standard procedure for applying to college inside the US will be sufficient to fulfill their entrance requirements. You won't be admitted unless you have the proper qualifications or make specific arrangements to be considered as an exception to their typical practices. And then lastly, let's talk about visa requirements. You'll need a passport just to get abroad, of course, but you'll also usually need documentation to show that you're legally permitted to actually live in that country for an extended period of time. That documentation is known as a visa. Different types of visas exist for different purposes and lengths of your stay. Fortunately for you, education is usually seen as a valid reason to live in another country temporarily, and being enrolled at a university will be a huge benefit in helping you to justify your stay to the foreign government. Getting visas and filling out your paperwork is kind of a major task. It sometimes involves substantial fees, long waiting periods, really exhaustive documentation, or sometimes it's relatively simple. You may or may not have to actually get your visa in advance. If you're planning to travel to a country where the official language isn't English, you may also have to get your documents professionally translated. That's something that adds additional time and cost to the process, so you want to keep that in mind too. Basically, the bottom line is you should always do your research on the specific country and the school ahead of time so you know exactly what to expect from the admissions process all the way through those visa requirements. For our last question of today, Becca is wondering, I needed to work a job in high school to make my own spending money. Will that look bad on my college applications? Well, first of all, it's really great that you worked a job during high school. It definitely shows a certain degree of responsibility that actually a lot of your classmates might not have to offer. But to answer your question, let me first talk a little bit about how colleges evaluate your activities in general. So admissions officers tend to judge the impressiveness of an activity by using the tier system. There are 4 tiers. Tier 1 is for national level or truly exceptional achievements, such as being the number 3 tennis player in the country. Tier 2 is for state level and other major achievements like making all-state orchestra. Tier 3 is for achievements that are more common but still demonstrate an above average level of competency in leadership. So for instance, being the varsity captain or your class vice president. And then Tier 4 is for activities that are more participatory, like just volunteering or playing in the school marching band. Working a job would also fall into that Tier 4 category, unless you held a leadership role at your job. Some students believe that Tier 4 activities are undesirable on the college application, but that's very much not true. While you should definitely aim to have some other higher tier activities if you want to aim for particularly selective schools, having Tier 4 activities does not hurt your application. In fact, they're actually valuable to admissions committees because they share more about your skills and interests and just how you spent your time. For example, working a job to earn spending money shows that you've taken some financial responsibility, which is great. That shows some independence that will be valuable in college. You might also have learned skills like customer service or conflict management. Think about the life skills that you gained in that job and be sure to highlight those on your application if you have space. So the bottom line is no, working a job in high school will not look bad on your college applications. And in fact, it can often work in your favor if you work to highlight the skills that you gained and how it demonstrates that you're a responsible young adult. Thank you to everyone who submitted our questions for this week. Hopefully we gave some helpful advice. If you have your own question that you'd like us to answer in a future Q&A, remember to submit that question for the next video in the comments below. Also, don't forget that if you're looking for completely free guidance on your essays, your applications, and more, you can visit us online at app.collegevine.com and sign up for an account. See you next week for our next Q&A.